Geography 507, Geography of the Global Economy, Module 14, Part 3. We're going to conclude our discussion of the industrialization of China and look at the impact of the ruler that followed Mao Zedong, Deng Xiaoping. Now, like Mao had his four olds, we're going to see one of the political policies pursued by Mao is what he called the four modernizations. Now, Deng had been a major political leader under Mao's control and had fallen in and out of favor. He was brought to be the party leader following Mao's death, and he's going to lead the party from 1978 to 1989 when he retires. He will still be considerably influential until his death in 1997. Now, he really inherits a mess. Political values have been eroded. Trust by the masses has been eroded. The social order had been turned on its ear. So Deng had a number of tasks. He's trying to regain social stability without the oppressive methods of Mao. And he's going to try to liberalize the economy and open up China to the West, to trade, to technology, to investment. He wants to keep China's political ideology a socialist one, but he wants to bring in free market capitalism into its communist, centrally planned economy. During his time, China went through a major reorientation of its economy, dismantling central planning in favor of private entrepreneurship and free market mechanisms, or at least partial free market mechanisms. And he's going to integrate China into the world economy based on a comparative advantage of what regions do compared to the idea of self-sufficiency. His political philosophy was to pursue the four modernizations: modernizing industry, agriculture, technology, and defense. So here we're back to really an economic focus by the government instead of that cultural one that Mao pursued. He's going to really try to start an open door policy instead of the isolation that we saw previously. Now, with regard to agriculture, he starts to transform agriculture from its massive commune system, where everyone produces a quota for the government, to a market-oriented policy. And he does that through a contract system. We're going to return the land to the farmers. But in this case, ownership will still remain with the government. And instead, you're going to get a long-term right of use land certificate. This is similar to what we saw in Vietnam. Vietnam is going to follow a lot of the Chinese policies. With that right of use land certificate, the farmer basically pays his rent through a quota, so he has a contract. But after that, anything that he grows or any improvements he intends to make to boost production, any of those crops are his to sell in a market system. At the same time, the government is going to invest in greater application of green revolution technology to help boost agricultural production. Now, this is going to dramatically increase efficiency. So, similar to what we saw in Vietnam, we're going to find more crops per year grown. We're going to find more efficiency and productiveness because of green revolution technologies. We're going to have a growth in the agricultural sector in terms of profitability. In this case, we're going to see hardworking farmers have a chance to make more money and diversify. We're going to get the start of an income separation between poorer farmers and richer farmers. And again, that is not typical compared to a communist system. Now, with regard to industry, he's going to transform it as well. This too is going to have a market-oriented policy. The big difference here from Mao is they're going to look at what regions have in terms of raw materials and opportunity. And they're going to try to build on that. So this is going to be a comparative advantage strategy versus the regional self-sufficiency pursued by Mao. Up to this point, all the businesses had been government-owned. It's pretty hard to sell off large steel factories. So the largest industries are going to remain government-owned, except under Deng, they're going to be required to be competitive. If, for example, a large steel mill could not make a profit, we're going to see layoffs. Well, wait a minute, unemployment is not part of the communist system. With regard to smaller industry, they're going to allow private ownership, and initially certain private ownership by Chinese. We're going to see entrepreneurship encouraged. We're going to have an idea that taking risk and trying to become a millionaire is a good thing. And we're going to end up with substantial income differential between workers and business owners, between rural and urban. This too, this risk and income profile is not typical of a centrally planned economy. To try to encourage foreign investment to come in, but at the same time keeping China communist, we're going to have foreign investment that's geographically limited or concentrated. Now Deng is going to create a two-tier system for foreign investment. First, we're going to get the creation of special economic zones. And these are the areas shown in that bright orangey red. You can see they're limited in number, very coastal, and they tend to take place at the locations where we already have a presence of foreign investors, such as Macau and Hong Kong, for example. The second tier is going to be something called open cities. Now, our special economic zones, the government's going to invest in the infrastructure and improve opportunities and basically do subsidizing of improvements. And so very much like an export processing zone. In an open coastal city, they're not going to put that type of investment in place on the behalf of whoever they can attract. Open coastal cities give outside businesses, foreign businesses, access. They don't give them improvement. And you can notice these two, the black dots, are all coastal. Again, limiting the foreign influence inland. Now, this has worked. Since 1992, China has permitted much more foreign investment aimed at their domestic market. Again, we've got 20% of the world as a domestic market. They've normalized trade relationships with the U.S. and the European Union. They joined the World Trade Organization in 2001. That would require more open markets as well. And we've had rapid economic growth. We've also had problems related to it. Certainly environmental degradation and pollution are serious issues. Industrialization's created severe income gaps that we mentioned, especially between rural and urban. This has led to migration issues. One of the things the government has done, and you'll see an example of later, is they've been trying to facilitate the industrial development of small town enterprises by Chinese as a way to slow down immigration to nearby major cities. Now, the end result is this income disparity. Rural is, in a relative sense, very poor compared to urban. Investment is going to urban and coastal. And what we're finding is much cheaper labor exists inland. It's just not easily accessible. So we'll see how that changes over time. Still, China is the economic development success story of the 1980s, 1990s, and really continuing 2 degrees today. When the world economy was sluggish in the 80s and 90s, China's manufacturing sector is growing by about 15% a year. Its GNP growing at over 8% a year. And this continues into the 2000s. And we see some production domination of both non-durable goods and durable goods. To give you an example, more than 60% of the toys in the world are made in China. More than 40% of all electronic devices, iPads, iPods, iPhones, Blackberries, PlayStations, Xbox, Wii, those are all, again, assembled in China. It's not surprising that Chinese exports continue to rise. Textile exports are expected to rise by 60% over the next few years, clothing exports by 200%. Now that part's kind of not surprising and goes what we've talked about before in terms of types of manufacturing in the core. But we're going to see the electronics and higher tech and durable goods continue to rapidly increase. And that becomes a threat. The U.S. currently buys almost $100 billion worth of Chinese goods a year. And we repeatedly hear talk about trying to put up quotas and limits in place, especially in terms of stuff like clothing, to try to save those U.S. manufacturing industries. That's difficult in the relationships we have with the WTO, for example. Most recently, we've seen the U.S. become involved in the Trans-Pacific Partnership. 12 countries that border the Pacific Ocean looking to increase trade between each other, and notably missing from those 12 countries is China. But China's growth is going rapidly. China's investment is growing rapidly, including foreign direct investment. Its domestic product continues to grow at a rapid rate as more of its people get reasonable incomes, and given the lower quality of life and the lower purchase that are typically made with lower prices, we're seeing their PPP, their purchasing power parity, rapidly increase. As this goes, Japanese are going to become, China and the Chinese are going to become much bigger consumers. This gets interesting if we start to think about consumption of cars, and therefore competition for the remaining oil. Again, don't forget, 20% of the world lives in one country. That FDI is extending around the world. This is out of the Fortune magazine a few years ago, but I think it sums it up. Companies from China spending billions to build factories in the U.S., creating jobs for American workers. Fair enough, but where does that corporate profit and control lie? Now I want you to look at a variety of industrial examples in this industrialization of China. And there are 4 for you to be able to compare and contrast. We're going to look at Shanghai, coastal city, major city, long history of colonial involvement, but one of the major places for a metropolitan boom, growing incredibly rapidly. A little bit outside of Shanghai, Xi'an, where we're seeing an effort to start small Chinese businesses in the countryside. We'll then go down into the region around Hong Kong, one of the special economic zones. And lastly, the issue of what we do with the big old Chinese industries. We're going to go to Shenyang, which is up near Beijing and part of the old industrial Rust Belt.